Welcome, history enthusiasts. Today, we drift back in time to one of the darkest chapters in Iceland's past, a story of fear, courage, and survival. Imagine standing on the cliffs of your village, only to watch pirates sweep across your homes and carry your loved ones away into slavery. In this video, we explore the terrifying raids that shook Iceland, the fate of the captives, and the lasting legacy of these events. If you love uncovering the hidden stories of history, don't forget to like this video, share it with fellow history buffs, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating journeys through time. Now let's step into history and witness what life was like for those who endured the unimaginable. Imagine standing on a rugged Icelandic coastline, the wind biting at your cheeks, carrying the scent of the sea mixed with the faint tang of moss and salt-soaked earth. The waves crash against jagged cliffs, hurling white foam high into the air, and the sound reverberates in your chest like a deep, warning drum. The landscape stretches endlessly, wild and untamed, a mixture of volcanic rock, dark green moss, and icy streams trickling into the sea. You can see the distant mountains, their peaks cloaked in mist, standing as silent sentinels over the villages that cling stubbornly to the shoreline. Life here is harsh, unforgiving, yet strangely beautiful, and it has always been this way. You have lived your entire life with the rhythm of the sea, the ebb and flow of the tides dictating the work and play of your days, and the cold, long winters shaping the resilience and determination of your people. The village itself is small, perhaps no more than a few dozen homes. Each structure is built carefully, with turf roofs to keep out the bitter cold, wooden beams lashed together with rope and reinforced with stones. Smoke rises from chimneys, curling upward and blending with the morning mist. The air carries the sounds of everyday life, the lowing of cows, the bleating of sheep, the laughter of children running along narrow paths worn into the rocky earth. Life is not easy, but it is predictable. Your family works the land, tends the livestock, and fishes from the jagged coves, taking only what the sea and earth provide, never more, because every morsel is precious. Neighbors rely on neighbors for survival. There is an unspoken bond forged by hardship and isolation. Your own home is modest, constructed from turf and stone, warm inside from the peat fire that crackles in the hearth. Around you, your family moves with practiced efficiency, performing tasks that have been handed down through generations. Your mother tends to the children, weaving wool and preparing food. Your father sharpens tools, repairs the small boats that venture into the cold waters, and keeps watch over the livestock. You know the patterns of the village intimately, the small market where fishermen trade for dried meat and wool, the path leading up the cliffs to the pasture, the tiny chapel where people gather for Sunday prayers. It is a world that is simple, steady, and familiar, and yet this world is precarious. Iceland, isolated though it may seem, is not untouched by the wider world. The sea that sustains you is also a conduit for strangers, for danger, for forces beyond your comprehension. Stories arrive sporadically, carried by travelers, by letters, or whispered from one village to another. Tales of raids of distant lands where people are taken by force circulate like shadows over your thoughts. These stories are often dismissed as exaggerations, as warnings to keep children close or to stay vigilant, but they linger in the mind, a quiet tremor beneath the surface of daily life. The idea of a stranger arriving uninvited, bringing chaos, is terrifying, but it is also almost unimaginable. Life has always been hard, but it has never been deliberately cruel in this way, until now. As you step closer to the cliffs, the wind whips your hair across your face, stinging your skin. You look out over the water and notice the horizon stretching endlessly, a line where sky meets sea in a muted haze. It seems calm, deceptively so, the waves rolling gently as if nothing were amiss. But even as you breathe in the crisp air, there is a sense of foreboding, an instinctive unease that you cannot shake. Perhaps it is the quiet of the morning, too still compared to the usual restless movement of the waves. Perhaps it is the way the gulls circle overhead, calling to one another with a sharpness that sets your nerves on edge. Whatever it is, it makes you glance back at your village, at the small cottages nestled among the rocks, and a cold, unspoken fear seeps into your heart. In the 17th century, Iceland was a land of extremes. The volcanic soil, while fertile in patches, demanded laborious care. Crops struggled against the relentless weather, and livestock were both precious and vulnerable. A poor harvest could mean famine, and the long winters tested every ounce of endurance a family possessed. Yet despite the hardships, communities thrived in their own rugged way. People knew the land, respected its rhythms, and understood that survival depended on cooperation and knowledge passed down through generations. Every adult carried the weight of responsibility. Every child learned the skills necessary to navigate this harsh environment, and every elder held stories of resilience, tragedy, and triumph that reminded everyone of their place in the long continuum of Icelandic life. You feel that history pressing against you even now, as though the cliffs and rocks themselves have absorbed the stories of centuries. Your people have faced harsh winters, volcanic eruptions, and unpredictable seas. You have endured sickness, crop failures, and the occasional marauding animal. But never before has a threat come so directly from another human hand, so outside the natural order of survival that you have always understood. There is a sense of vulnerability that pervades the village, an almost palpable tension that people have learned to live with quietly, acknowledging it only in passing conversation or furtive glances toward the horizon. The community's life is cyclical, tied intimately to the seasons. Summer brings relief and labor in equal measure. The long daylight hours used to harvest, mend, fish, and prepare for the harsh winter ahead. Autumn is a time of preparation, storing food, fortifying homes, and ensuring livestock are sheltered. Winter is a test of endurance, with snow and ice making travel difficult, isolating families for weeks, even months. Spring brings renewal, the thawing of the rivers, the first shoots of green, and a cautious hope that the next cycle of life will be a little easier than the last. Through it all, the people of your village persevere, finding moments of joy amidst hardship, celebrating small victories, and maintaining traditions that bind them together across generations. Your own family's story is entwined with the land. Perhaps your ancestors were fishermen, braving the dangerous waters year after year to provide for their families. Perhaps they were shepherds, guiding their flocks along treacherous cliffs, learning every safe path by heart. Each stone in your home, each rope on a boat, each tool in the workshop carries the imprint of those who came before you. And now, as you stand on the cliffs, the wind tearing at your clothing and hair, you feel the fragility of it all. The life you know, the safety you assume, the family you love, hanging by a thread, exposed to a world that can be both beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It is here, in this delicate balance of beauty and danger, of familiarity and vulnerability, that the shadow of the unknown begins to loom. The sea, which has always been a provider, a sustainer of life, also becomes a mirror of potential terror. Each ripple, each wave, each distant glimmer on the horizon could signal the arrival of something or someone intent on disrupting the fragile peace. The mind cannot help but wander to what could happen, to what you have only heard about in hushed tales, and to the stark realization that no one, no matter how clever, strong, or vigilant, can fully control the forces that come from beyond your sight. It is in this liminal moment, between calm and chaos, between routine and disaster, that the story begins. You, an Icelander, are about to witness the unimaginable, to feel the sharp sting of helplessness, and to confront the cruel reality that life, as you have always known it, can be stolen in an instant by forces beyond your comprehension. And so you wait, standing on the cliff, eyes scanning the horizon, heart beating in rhythm with the crashing waves, aware that history is about to descend upon you in a way you could never have imagined. The morning begins like any other, with the sun rising over the jagged cliffs and casting a golden shimmer on the restless waves below. The air is crisp, the kind of cold that makes your lungs ache slightly with each breath, and the smell of salt and seaweed fills your nostrils. The village seems calm, almost peaceful, the way it always does before work begins. Children chase each other along narrow paths between cottages, their laughter echoing lightly over the rocks. Men repair nets and boats, their hands rough and weathered from years of labor, while women tend to the hearths, preparing the day's first meal. Life proceeds in its familiar rhythm, steady and predictable, like the ebb and flow of the tide. But then, as you stand on the cliff's edge, something catches your eye. A dark shape on the horizon, tiny, almost imperceptible, but moving in a way that makes your chest tighten with unease. At first you convince yourself it's just a group of fishermen returning from an early morning expedition. But as the shape grows larger, as the outline of ships becomes unmistakable, a sense of dread settles over you. These are not your neighbors. These are strangers, far from home, and their approach carries an air of purpose, a precision that does not belong to the scattered fishermen of your village. The ships glide over the water with eerie smoothness, their sails taut, catching the wind perfectly. There is a confidence in their movement, a knowledge of the sea that makes them seem almost like predators. You squint, trying to make out details, and slowly the truth begins to crystallize in your mind. These are not ordinary travelers. These are not traders or explorers. There is something distinctly foreign about the ships, something almost menacing in the way they cut through the waves, unhurried yet unstoppable. A chill runs down your spine as the first whispers reach your ears. Villagers who have noticed the same anomaly begin to murmur among themselves. Turkish ships, some say, repeating the word as if saying it aloud could make it less real. Others shake their heads, refusing to believe the fear creeping into their hearts. After all, you have heard stories, distant tales of raids on other lands, of people taken far from home and never returning. But Iceland feels isolated, removed from the chaos of the wider world. Surely such horrors cannot reach here, to these cliffs, to this small village you call home. Yet the evidence is undeniable. The ships are coming, and the intent behind their journey is clear. As the pirates draw closer, the village begins to stir. Men drop their tools and shout warnings. Women gather children and call out to neighbors, and elders stare at the horizon with eyes wide, silently recalling tales of terror they have long tried to forget. There is no time to fully comprehend what is happening. The moment arrives too quickly, too suddenly, and you realize with a sinking heart that nothing in your experience has prepared you for this. The ships reach the shallows near the shore, their hulls cutting through the water with deliberate ease. You can now see the pirates clearly. They are a diverse and formidable group, men of different sizes and ages, their skin darkened by the sun and sea, their movements precise and practiced. Weapons glint in the sunlight, long sabers, curved scimitars, and iron hooks that catch the light with a deadly sparkle. Their eyes, sharp and calculating, sweep over the village as if assessing each target, each potential victim. There is no hesitation in their approach, no uncertainty. They know exactly what they have come for. Fear grips the villagers as the first of the pirates leap onto the shore. Their boots hit the rocks and sand with a solid, commanding thud. They move like shadows, silently at first, then with increasing speed. spreading out to cover the village. You see neighbors pulled from homes, struggling against hands stronger than their own. Screams pierce the air, sharp and panicked, mingling with the cries of children who cannot yet understand the danger they face. The pirates' efficiency is terrifying. They do not waste time. Men are bound and pushed toward the ships, women are grabbed and carried off, and children, the youngest among you, are snatched up with ruthless precision. Panic spreads like wildfire. Some villagers attempt resistance, grabbing pitchforks, knives, or whatever tools they can find, but it is largely ineffective. The pirates are not merely raiders, they are trained captors, moving in coordinated waves, anticipating the villagers' reactions. Their presence is overwhelming, their numbers intimidating, and soon the village is thrown into chaos. Doors slam, pets scatter, livestock bleat in terror, and the once familiar sounds of everyday life are replaced by shouts, cries, and the clash of metal. The air is thick with dust and smoke as small fires are accidentally set, torches knocked over in the scramble. The smell of burning wood mixes with the salt and sea, creating a heady, nauseating haze. Children cling to their parents, some sobbing, some frozen in disbelief, unable to comprehend the sudden brutality. Mothers scream for husbands, husbands search desperately for children, and fathers attempt to defend their homes with whatever means they have. But resistance is often met with swift retaliation. A pirate swings a saber, a cry is silenced, and the remaining villagers retreat, terrified, into the narrow alleys and rocky outcrops of the village. You try to move, to intervene, but your body feels heavy, your mind frozen with disbelief. How can this be happening? This is your home, your sanctuary, your world, and yet it is being ripped apart in moments. The pirates move through the village like a storm, methodical, unrelenting, and the realization hits you that there is no mercy in their purpose. They are not here for food, not for gold, not for trade. They are here to take what they came for, your family, your children, your very future. The horror deepens when you see the children being carried toward the boats. Some cry, some struggle, some are silent with fear. You notice the older boys attempting to shield the younger ones, but their efforts are futile. The pirates are too strong, too many, and too experienced. The image sears itself into your mind, a small child, no more than 5 or 6, lifted into the air by a man twice their size, their tiny hands grasping for something familiar, anything to hold on to, and all they find is the empty sky above. You glance at the water and notice that some villagers have run to the shore in desperate hope, thinking they might escape by swimming or hiding among the rocks. But the pirates anticipate this, and long poles or nets are used to block the paths, dragging the unlucky ones back toward the ships. The waves themselves seem to conspire against you, cold and unwelcoming, as if warning you that there is no refuge in the sea today. The very element that has sustained your people for generations now becomes a pathway to captivity. And then there is the shouting, the foreign tongue of the pirates, harsh and commanding, orders barked to each other, not in anger but in precision. You cannot understand the words, yet their meaning is clear. It is a language of domination, of instruction, of taking control of a world that is not theirs. The pirates move with fluid coordination, each action purposeful, each gesture calculated to subdue and seize. There is no hesitation, no doubt, no fear in their movements. They are predators, and you are prey. You watch as families are torn apart. Parents try to bargain, to plead, to offer possessions in exchange for safety, but it is to no avail. The pirates are uninterested in trade or negotiation. Their goal is the human cargo, and nothing else matters. You see people dragged into boats, screaming, struggling, fighting, their voices fading as the vessels move back into deeper waters. The realization settles on you like a stone. These people, your neighbors, your friends, your children, may never return. They are being carried across the sea to lives you cannot imagine, to fates you cannot control, and the sense of helplessness is overwhelming, even in the midst of chaos. there is a strange, surreal beauty in the scene. The sunlight catches the blades and armor of the pirates, glinting like fire on water. Seagulls wheel overhead, indifferent to the human drama below, calling out as if to mark the event. The waves crash relentlessly. The cliffs stand tall and unyielding, and the world continues its rhythm even as everything familiar is ripped away. It is a reminder that life does not pause for grief or terror, that the natural world remains indifferent to human suffering, and that history is often written in moments of sudden, unimaginable violence. And then it is over, almost as quickly as it began. The pirates retreat to their ships, the shoreline littered with the remnants of what was once a village bustling with life. The survivors stumble out of hiding, pale and trembling, counting heads, searching desperately for anyone left behind. Mothers clutch empty arms, fathers slump in despair, and the children who remain are silent, their eyes wide and uncomprehending. The village has been emptied of the future, its vitality carried away across the waves, and a deep, unshakable fear settles over those who remain. You stand on the cliffs again, looking out at the ships disappearing over the horizon, carrying with them people you may never see again. The wind whips at your face, the waves crash violently below, and the sun dips slightly, casting long shadows across the landscape. In this moment the scale of what has happened sinks in. The pirates were not mere criminals. They were part of a system, a network of raiders whose lives depended on the capture and sale of humans. The sea, the horizon, the world beyond Iceland is larger and more dangerous than you could have imagined, and for the first time you understand that your village, your family, your life, exists within a fragile and precarious web of forces beyond your control. The moment the pirates reach the village, the quiet morning shatters like glass under a hammer. The air, once crisp and filled with the familiar smells of salt, smoke, and hearth fires, becomes thick with tension, fear, and the unmistakable stench of panic. Villagers scream, and the sound ricochets against the stone and turf houses, echoing across the cliffs in a way that seems almost unnatural. You stand frozen for a heartbeat, unable to move, your eyes tracing the movement of the intruders as they fan out across the village with terrifying precision. It is as if they know every step you might take before you take it, every route you could follow, every hiding place you might attempt to reach. The first encounter is brutal and immediate. A neighbor, a man you have known since childhood, is grabbed as he tries to barricade his door with a wooden beam. His struggle is short-lived. The pirate's strength is immense, their grip iron-like, and in a few moments he is lifted off the ground, his cries piercing the air. The sound is so sudden and so shocking that it freezes your limbs, and you realize, with a cold sinking feeling, that resistance may be futile. Across the village similar scenes unfold, women dragged screaming from homes, children torn from their parents' arms, the elderly pushed aside or restrained as the raiders move methodically through every street and alley. The chaos is overwhelming. You try to think, to act, but your mind is clouded by terror. Each step you take is measured against instinct, yet the village itself seems to conspire against you. Narrow alleys, once familiar paths, now become traps. Rocky outcrops that offered safety in ordinary days become obstacles, slowing you as the pirates advance. Your breath comes in short gasps, mingling with the cries of the captured and the shouts of the pirates. Every sound feels amplified, the clanging of metal, the thud of boots on stone, the frantic whimpering of children, all combine to create a cacophony that grips your very soul. Some villagers attempt to fight back. A young man, perhaps emboldened by desperation or sheer disbelief, seizes a pitchfork and charges at one of the raiders. For a brief moment it seems he might succeed, that the pirate could be repelled. But the moment is fleeting. The pirate sidesteps with practiced ease, striking with a curved saber that flashes in the sunlight. The man falls, not dead but incapacitated, and is swiftly bound with ropes, another victim added to the growing number who will be carried away. The courage of the villagers is met with precision and efficiency, a stark reminder that these are not haphazard attackers. They are trained raiders, experienced in the capture of human beings, their entire operation choreographed like a deadly dance. Children scream, their voices a mix of fear, confusion, and helplessness. Mothers try to shield them, wrapping their arms around small bodies, pressing them to their chests, whispering words of comfort that sound hollow against the backdrop of chaos. Fathers grapple with pirates, pulling with all their strength, their faces red with exertion, yet almost inevitably, the intruders' superior numbers and weaponry prevail. Tiny hands reach for familiar faces, for a hand to hold, for some symbol of safety, and find only empty air as the children are lifted, carried, and placed onto boats waiting at the water's edge. The terror of that moment, the sudden, wrenching separation, is indescribable, a sharp physical ache that lodges in your chest. You notice the calculated efficiency of the pirates. Each man seems to know his role perfectly. One secures the perimeter, preventing escape, another moves through the streets, collecting captives, yet another guards the shorelines, ensuring that no one can flee to the cliffs or the water. There is no hesitation, no faltering. Their intent is singular and unyielding. This is not a chaotic attack born of anger or revenge. It is a deliberate, organized operation designed to seize as many human beings as possible, to strip the village of its young and strong, and to depart before reinforcements or external intervention can occur. The scene is surreal. Fires, started either accidentally or intentionally, flicker along the village edges, casting long, dancing shadows across the buildings and rocks. Smoke rises, twisting into the sky, mixing with the salt-laden mist and creating a haze that distorts vision. In that haze, the movements of the pirates are almost ghost-like, silhouettes against the backdrop of fire and smoke, methodical and unrelenting. Villagers stumble through the smoke, coughing, choking, and searching desperately for anyone left behind. You glimpse faces, friends, family, neighbors, etched with fear, disbelief, and grief. Some are frozen in shock, unable to move, others are running, hoping to escape the grasp of the intruders, only to be intercepted, captured, and carried away. The physical violence is matched by psychological terror. Parents are forced to watch their children taken, unable to intervene. Children see their parents struggling, failing, and are themselves subjected to the same helplessness. The older villagers, those who have seen hardship and suffering throughout their lives, are not spared from the horror. They are pushed aside, threatened, bound, or even struck down if they attempt to interfere. The message is unmistakable: no one is immune, no one is safe, and resistance is futile. Amidst the terror, small acts of human instinct and emotion appear. A mother whispers a prayer as she clutches her child, her lips moving silently in the hope that some higher power might intervene. A father lifts his arms, trying to block a pirate from taking his son, only to be knocked aside, but not before his eyes meet those of his child, conveying love, courage, and a desperate hope that the separation might be temporary. Siblings hold on to each other, brothers and sisters pressing together in instinctive solidarity, while friends call out names in frantic hopes of regrouping, only to find that in the chaos, such reunions are almost impossible. The pirates move with relentless efficiency. They use ropes to bind villagers, thrusting them into small boats anchored just offshore. Some of the raiders use long poles to prevent anyone from reaching the water, dragging those who attempt escape back toward the waiting vessels. The sea, which has always been a source of life and sustenance, now becomes a conveyor of captivity. Boats are loaded swiftly, human cargo stacked like bundles, their protests and cries fading as the raiders prepare to depart. There is a chilling detachment in the pirates' actions, a focus on their objective that allows no room for empathy or hesitation. Even as the raiders work, The natural world bears witness, indifferent, yet vivid. Seagulls wheel above, calling with sharp cries, perhaps drawn to the chaos or merely continuing their routine. The waves crash against the rocky cliffs, relentless and unforgiving, carrying the sounds of the raid across the coastline. The sun shines brightly, almost mocking in its serenity, illuminating the horror below. Every element, the cliffs, the sea, the sky, creates a juxtaposition of natural beauty and human cruelty that etches itself indelibly into memory. You find yourself frozen on the cliffs, watching helplessly as families are torn apart. The realization of helplessness settles over you like a heavy fog. There is no one to call for help, no army to repel these intruders, no sanctuary to escape to. The isolation that once gave your village a sense of safety now becomes a liability. The very geography that protects your home from the elements also exposes it to attackers, providing few avenues for escape. The sheer scale of the assault, combined with the efficiency and coordination of the pirates, overwhelms the mind, leaving a sensation of unreality. How can this be happening? How can your world, the one you have known since birth, be dismantled in an instant by these outsiders? Amid the chaos, some villagers attempt small acts of defiance. A young boy hides behind a rock, holding his breath as a pirate passes by, praying that he will not be discovered. A young woman slips into a small alley, her arms shielding her younger siblings, and presses herself against the wall, hoping the raiders will overlook them. Such acts are fleeting but profound, illustrating the human instinct to survive even when surrounded by overwhelming danger. Every moment of evasion, every split-second decision to hide or flee becomes a testament to the resilience of those caught in the raid. Yet for many the fate is grim. Those captured are bound with ropes, forced onto the ships, and prepared for a journey across an unfamiliar and hostile sea. The cries of the children, the pleas of mothers, the despairing shouts of fathers, all blend into a single unforgettable chorus of fear and suffering. It is a sound that will haunt those who survive for the rest of their lives, a reminder of the day when the familiar world of home and family was violently upended, and then, as suddenly as it began, the raid starts to wind down. The pirates retreat to their ships, leaving the village in a stunned, broken silence. Survivors emerge from hiding, counting heads, searching desperately for anyone who remains. The devastation is complete. Homes are ransacked, livestock scattered or taken, and families fractured. The psychological impact is profound. Children who remain are silent, traumatized beyond words. Adults are paralyzed by grief, guilt, and a sense of helplessness. The village, once bustling with life, now feels hollow, its energy drained by the violence and fear that swept through it. Standing on the cliffs, looking out at the horizon where the ships disappear, a chilling realization settles over you. These raiders were not merely opportunistic thieves, they were part of a system, a network of predators whose lives depended on capturing human beings. The sea, which has always been a source of sustenance and connection to the wider world, now seems like a dangerous, uncontrollable force, carrying away not just goods, but people, families, and futures. The horror of the raid is not limited to the physical act of violence. It extends into the psyche, into the collective memory of the survivors, shaping the culture, the stories, and the consciousness of Icelanders for generations to come. The raids that struck Iceland in the early 17th century did not emerge out of a vacuum. They were part of a larger, complex web of geopolitics, maritime power, and the brutal economic realities of the Mediterranean and North African worlds. To understand what happened to your village, to the children and families torn from their homes, it is necessary to step back and examine the broader forces at play, the geopolitical currents, the maritime traditions, and the historical context that made such attacks possible. At this time, much of Europe was deeply entangled in the struggle between Christian kingdoms and the Ottoman Empire. which extended its influence across North Africa, the eastern Mediterranean, and parts of the Middle East. Along the Barbary coast, modern-day Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya, coastal cities such as Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli thrived on piracy, privateering, and the capture of human beings. These cities were not lawless primitive outposts, as some histories would suggest. They were organized, politically sophisticated societies whose economies were partially sustained by maritime raids. Ships sent from these ports sailed the Atlantic and Mediterranean in search of wealth, supplies, and tragically, human cargo. These raids were not random acts of cruelty but calculated operations aimed at generating profit and strengthening political and economic power. Iceland, remote as it was, became an unexpected target for these raiders. Though isolated in the North Atlantic, its coastlines were sparsely defended, and the scattered settlements made it both vulnerable and enticing. The raiders, experienced in long-distance navigation, understood that the island's communities could be overwhelmed with relatively small numbers. They knew that Icelanders, despite their courage and resilience, lacked the naval and military capacity to repel seasoned pirates. This vulnerability turned the idyllic fishing villages and remote homesteads into easy prey. The first major raid in 1627 is now remembered in Icelandic history as the Tyrkjarnir, the Turkish abduction. Despite the name, the pirates were primarily from the Barbary coast of North Africa, often referred to by Icelanders simply as Turks, a term reflecting their perception of foreign, Muslim raiders rather than their precise ethnicity or political affiliation. This raid struck multiple locations, from the West Fjords to the East Coast, with a single devastating strategy: strike quickly, seize captives, and retreat before local resistance could be organized. In total, over 400 Icelanders were abducted, including men, women, and children, with many never returning. The psychological impact on those who survived was profound, creating a collective memory of fear that endured for generations. The raid in 1627 was not an isolated incident in global history. Barbary piracy was a centuries-long phenomenon, affecting not only Iceland but also the coasts of Spain, France, Italy, and even as far north as England and the Netherlands. Ships from North Africa and the Ottoman Empire would sail into European waters, capturing sailors, merchants, and villagers alike. Captives were either sold into slavery in North Africa or ransomed for vast sums. The system was sophisticated. Families of captives, governments, and religious orders were often involved in paying ransoms, negotiating the release of those taken. For the pirates, the economics were simple and brutal. Captives represented wealth. Those who could be ransomed brought money, and those who could not were sold into labor in the growing urban centers along the Barbary coast. In Iceland, the consequences were devastating. The raids shattered communities, leaving survivors traumatized and fearful. The immediate impact was physical: homes looted, livestock taken or killed, children and adults carried away. The long-term consequences were psychological and social. Families were permanently fractured. Entire villages lost a generation of young people. The survivors were left to rebuild, often struggling with grief, trauma, and the knowledge that the same fate could strike again. Stories of the raids were passed down orally, woven into the fabric of folklore, and used as cautionary tales for future generations. The Icelandic authorities at the time were powerless to prevent such raids. The island was under Danish rule, but the Danish crown provided little military protection. Iceland's geography, while beautiful and rugged, made the construction of effective defenses nearly impossible. Villages were scattered across fjords and cliffs, far from centralized fortifications. Communication between settlements was slow, and news of attacks often arrived too late to mount a coordinated response. The isolation that had once been a protective advantage now left Icelanders exposed to the predatory reach of the pirates. Accounts from survivors reveal the stark human reality behind these historical events. Letters, journals, and oral histories tell of captives taken to foreign lands, subjected to slavery, and forced to adapt to cultures and climates far removed from their own. Many were put to work in harsh labor, construction, agriculture, domestic service, or even military service, under conditions that were physically demanding and psychologically tormenting. Language barriers, cultural differences, and the loss of family compounded the suffering. Some captives were ransomed back, sometimes years later, but many perished far from home, their names and lives fading into the distant past. The memory of these raids also influenced Icelandic culture and identity. Songs, poems, and sagas recorded the terror and heroism of those moments. Survivors recounted the details with vivid clarity: the smell of the sea, the flash of weapons in the sun, the screams of the captured, and the chilling calm with which the pirates executed their plan. These narratives reinforced communal bonds among those left behind, creating a shared sense of vulnerability, but also resilience. People learned to be vigilant, to trust in their neighbors, and to understand the precariousness of life in an isolated and harsh environment. The raids also forced Icelanders to reckon with the broader geopolitical realities of their time. While the island seemed remote and self-contained, it was in fact part of a connected world where the actions of distant powers could have immediate and devastating effects. Iceland's experience was a microcosm of global dynamics. The economic and military pressures in one part of the world could reverberate across oceans and seas, affecting communities that seemed safely removed from conflict. For Icelanders, this was a painful lesson in the limits of isolation and the need for vigilance in an unpredictable world. Religious and cultural perceptions further colored the understanding of the raids. Icelanders, predominantly Christian, viewed the pirates as both a physical and spiritual threat. The term Turk carried connotations of the unknown, the foreign, associated with Islamic faith, distant lands, and practices that were unfamiliar and feared. This perception heightened the horror of the raids, framing them not merely as acts of criminal violence, but as confrontations with an alien and threatening world. The trauma of witnessing children and neighbors abducted, and the knowledge that they might never return, became intertwined with these cultural and religious fears, creating a deeply ingrained narrative of danger from the outside world. The logistical sophistication of the raids was remarkable. The pirates' knowledge of navigation, tides, and local geography allowed them to strike villages with terrifying precision. Ships would approach quietly, often under the cover of fog or darkness, avoiding detection until it was too late. Once ashore, their coordinated actions ensured maximum efficiency, seizing captives and retreating before local forces could respond. Such organization reflects not chaos but planning, intelligence gathering, and experience honed over years of maritime predation. The raids were as much military operations as they were acts of piracy, combining strategy, speed, and brutality to achieve their objectives. Survivor accounts detail the psychological toll of witnessing these raids. The suddenness of the attack, the efficiency of the pirates, and the helplessness of the villagers created a trauma that persisted long after the physical destruction ended. Children were forced to confront violence and loss at an age when the world had previously been safe and familiar. Adults grappled with guilt, grief, and a sense of impotence. Communities struggled to reorganize, rebuild, and find meaning in the aftermath of events that seemed senseless and overwhelmingly cruel. The collective trauma became a defining aspect of Icelandic memory, influencing literature, folklore, and communal consciousness for centuries. Even the geography of Iceland itself played a role in shaping the historical context. Fjords, cliffs, and narrow valleys that once protected villages from harsh weather now became obstacles during raids, complicating escape and rescue. The isolation of settlements, which fostered close-knit communities, also meant that news of attacks traveled slowly. By the time villagers in neighboring areas learned of the raids, the pirates had often already disappeared into the vast North Atlantic, carrying their captives far from the reach of immediate help. The very environment that nurtured Icelandic resilience also amplified vulnerability when faced with human predators. The economic and political realities of the time also contributed to the raid's occurrence. Piracy along the Barbary coast was not merely opportunistic, it was embedded in broader networks of trade, diplomacy, and military strategy. Captives were valuable commodities, and their capture served multiple purposes: financial gain, political leverage, and social control. Governments and rulers often tolerated or even encouraged such activity, understanding that the profits from captives could support cities, armies, and political ambitions. In this sense, the raids in Iceland were part of a much larger system, a reflection of the interconnectedness of early modern Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean world. The historical context of these raids reveals a world in which remote communities were never truly safe. Iceland, despite its isolation, was part of global currents of trade, conflict, and exploitation. The events of 1627 and 1628 underscore the reality that even distant, seemingly peripheral regions were subject to the forces of geopolitics, economics, and maritime power. Understanding this context deepens our appreciation of the courage and resilience of Icelanders who survived, who rebuilt, and who passed down the memory of these raids through stories, songs, and historical records. Ultimately, the historical context of the raids illuminates both the vulnerability and the resilience of Icelandic communities. Turkish abductions were more than a moment of violence. They were a reflection of a connected world in which geography, politics, economics, and culture intersected in ways that could bring sudden, devastating consequences to even the most remote communities. For those who witnessed the raids, the experience was formative, shaping collective memory, cultural identity, and the understanding of the wider world. The lessons learned from these events would resonate for generations, a testament to human endurance in the face of cruelty, unpredictability, and the harsh realities of a world defined as much by violence as by beauty. Standing centuries later on the same cliffs and beaches where the events unfolded, one can sense the weight of history pressing down. The land bears silent witness to the fear, grief, and courage of those who lived through the raids. The waves, unchanged in their rhythm, carry the echoes of cries that have long since faded but are preserved in memory and record. And the people, though many were lost, endured, rebuilt, and remembered, ensuring that the lessons of those raids were never forgotten. The captives, seized with terrifying efficiency from their homes and villages, are forced onto the pirate ships, leaving the familiar cliffs and shores of Iceland behind. For many, the first moments on the deck are almost surreal, a disorienting blur of wind, salt spray, and the cries of those around them. Children cling to parents, mothers hold on to infants, and men struggle to remain upright on the rocking wooden deck, their legs unsteady, their minds spinning from shock and fear. The smell of the sea is thick with sweat, fear, and the tang of blood from those already wounded. Every movement, every command from the pirates, is met with terror, for it is impossible to predict which act of obedience might be enough to ensure survival and which might provoke violence. The ships themselves are crowded, poorly ventilated, and designed to carry as many human captives as possible. Those forced below deck find themselves in suffocating darkness, packed tightly with others, their heads bent, their limbs restricted. The air is damp and stale, carrying a mixture of fear, unwashed bodies, and the faint, acrid smell of salt water seeping through the wooden hull. Children cry incessantly, some of them too terrified to even speak, while mothers try to comfort them, whispering soft words that cannot mask the reality of their situation. For many, this is the first time they realize that the life they knew, the warmth of home, the comfort of familiar surroundings, the security of family, is gone. It has been replaced by the rocking, merciless sea, and by strangers whose eyes show no mercy. Above deck, the pirates continue to work with ruthless efficiency. Some keep watch, scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. Others administer discipline, ensuring that captives remain compliant, sometimes using violence to reinforce their authority. The captives themselves learn quickly that disobedience or resistance often results in punishment, while compliance can sometimes provide small moments of reprieve. Yet even in compliance, the psychological toll is immense. They are forced to surrender autonomy, to submit entirely to the will of their captors, and to confront the horrifying reality that their destinies have been ripped from their hands. The journey itself is arduous and terrifying. The North Atlantic, even in summer, is unforgiving. Waves crash against the ships, soaking the captives and chilling them to the bone. The wind whips across the deck, cutting through clothing and leaving exposed skin raw. Seasickness claims many, adding to the misery of fear and uncertainty. For children, the motion of the ship is terrifying, compounded by hunger, thirst, and exhaustion. Parents struggle to comfort them, often unsuccessfully, as the rolling decks make even simple gestures difficult. The journey, which may last days or weeks, becomes a test of endurance, a cruel trial in which survival is uncertain. The captives are transported to ports along the Barbary coast, where the environment itself presents new challenges. The climate is drastically different from Iceland, with heat and humidity replacing the cold, crisp air of home. Water is scarce and often rationed, and food is minimal and unfamiliar. Many captives are unaccustomed to the spices, flavors, and textures of North African cuisine, their stomachs rejecting the meager provisions provided. Hunger and dehydration compound the psychological trauma, leaving captives weak and vulnerable. The sheer disorientation, being surrounded by strangers speaking an unfamiliar language, seeing landscapes unlike anything they have known, intensifies feelings of isolation and fear. Once ashore, captives are often sold into slavery or forced into labor. Some are purchased by wealthy families to work in homes, tending to domestic chores, caring for children, or performing physically demanding tasks. Others are sent to work in agriculture, constructing buildings, maintaining fields, or transporting goods. Those deemed physically capable may be conscripted into military service, forced to fight in conflicts far removed from their homeland. The captives' lives are now dictated entirely by the needs and whims of their owners, and autonomy, freedom, and even basic dignity are stripped away. The psychological impact is profound. The captives, especially children, experience deep trauma from the sudden separation from family, the violence they witnessed, and the uncertainty of their future. Many are unable to speak, unable to cry, or unable to comprehend the full extent of their situation. Parents endure the torment of being separated from their children, often powerless to even communicate with them. The loss of familiar social structures, the absence of community, and the sudden exposure to an alien culture create a sense of dislocation that is both immediate and enduring. Some captives are ransomed back to their families or communities after years of negotiation. Religious orders, governments, or wealthy relatives sometimes pay significant sums to secure their release. The process is complex and fraught with uncertainty. Negotiations can take months or even years, and the captives themselves often endure additional hardship during this time, living in uncertainty and anxiety about their fate. Many, however, never return, their lives cut short by illness, maltreatment, or the harsh conditions of forced labor. Language barriers create another layer of suffering. Captives are often unable to communicate with their captors or fellow prisoners. Misunderstandings are frequent, and inability to convey basic needs can result in punishment or deprivation. Over time, some adapt by learning the language of their captors, but this adaptation is often a slow, painful process, and for many it is accompanied by a loss of cultural identity and connection to their homeland. Religious and cultural differences further complicate the captives' experience. Icelanders, predominantly Christian, find themselves in a Muslim-majority society, unfamiliar with local customs, practices, and social norms. Religious observances, dietary restrictions, and social hierarchies create additional barriers, reinforcing feelings of alienation and fear. The captives are forced to navigate a world in which they are outsiders in every sense, their previous lives erased in the eyes of those around them. The captive's health is another constant concern. Malnutrition, exposure to harsh labor, unsanitary living conditions, and the stress of captivity take a heavy toll. Disease spreads rapidly in crowded conditions, and medical care, if available at all, is minimal. Many captives succumb to illness, their bodies unable to withstand the combined physical and psychological pressures of their new environment. Survivors often emerge weakened, scarred, and permanently altered by their experiences. Despite the severity of their circumstances, some captives demonstrate remarkable resilience. Children who survive the initial trauma gradually adapt, finding small ways to cope with fear and uncertainty. Adults develop strategies for endurance, learning to anticipate the needs and moods of their captors, to navigate social hierarchies, and to preserve fragments of identity and memory. These acts of survival are quiet but powerful, a testament to the human capacity to endure even in the most extreme conditions. The captive's stories also illuminate broader historical realities. The network of Barbary piracy and slavery was extensive, involving traders, merchants, and officials across the Mediterranean and North Africa. Captives were commodities in a system that blended economic pragmatism with brutality. Their experiences were shaped not only by individual captors, but by the structural realities of the societies in which they were forced to live. Icelandic captives, like those from other parts of Europe, became unwilling participants in a global system of commerce, conflict, and human exploitation. Letters and accounts from ransomed captives provide harrowing insight into their experiences. Some describe the physical violence endured during the initial capture and transport. Others recount the psychological torment of separation, the longing for home, and the struggle to maintain faith and hope in a world that seems indifferent to suffering. These narratives emphasize both the cruelty of captivity and the extraordinary resilience required to survive. They also provide a link between Iceland and the wider world, demonstrating how even remote communities were drawn into global historical currents. The fate of the captives had long-term consequences for Icelandic society. Villages lost significant portions of their population, particularly young people, which affected labor, family structures, and demographic growth. Communities were forced to rebuild, not only physically but emotionally, grappling with grief and trauma. The memory of the captive's suffering became woven into Icelandic culture, influencing folklore, literature, and collective identity. Songs, stories, and poems commemorated the events, ensuring that future generations would remember the hardships endured and the resilience demonstrated. In some cases, captives adapted to their new lives, integrating into local communities in North Africa. They married, worked, and, over time, became part of the societies that had once been alien to them. Such adaptation was often forced and marked by the tension between survival and the loss of one's original identity. Yet, even in these circumstances, the memory of home persisted, creating a duality in which captives carried both the new realities of their lives and the unshakable imprint of Icelandic culture and heritage. The legacy of these captives also influenced diplomatic and religious relations between Europe and North Africa. Ransoming captives became an institutionalized process, with churches, states, and families working to secure freedom. These negotiations reflected the value placed on human life within broader social and economic frameworks, as well as the recognition that captivity in foreign lands could have profound personal and political consequences. Ultimately, the fate of the captives underscores the human cost of the raids. Beyond the physical violence and material loss, the psychological trauma, social disruption, and cultural dislocation had profound and lasting effects. Those taken from Iceland experienced a world entirely removed from their own, confronting hunger, fear, illness, and alienation. Yet within these hardships, many demonstrated resilience, endurance, and the ability to adapt, leaving a legacy of survival that would echo across generations. Standing on the cliffs of Iceland today, imagining the children and families carried away by pirates, one can feel the weight of history and the scale of human suffering. The waves crash as they always have, indifferent to human loss, yet the memory of those taken persists. Their stories, preserved in letters, oral histories, and cultural memory, remind us of the fragility of life, the reach of human cruelty, and the remarkable capacity of people to endure in the face of unimaginable adversity. Standing on the rugged cliffs overlooking the North Atlantic, it is impossible not to feel the weight of history pressing down. The wind whips at your face, carrying the salty scent of the sea, just as it did centuries ago. The waves crash relentlessly against the rocks below, indifferent to human life, indifferent to suffering, yet carrying with them echoes of stories, grief, courage, and resilience that have traveled across generations. It is here, in this intersection of land and sea, past and present, that the memory of the raids, the Turkish abductions, the Barbary coast piracy, remains most vivid, etched into the collective consciousness of Iceland and the identity of its people. The events of 1627 and 1628 left an indelible mark not only on the communities directly affected, but also on Icelandic society as a whole. The physical destruction of villages, the loss of life, and the abduction of hundreds of children and adults were catastrophic. Entire communities were traumatized, their daily rhythms disrupted, their futures forever altered. Survivors faced the daunting task of rebuilding homes, livelihoods, and social networks from the ashes of what had been taken from them. Each stone laid, each roof rebuilt, each animal cared for, was a defiance of the violence that had struck so suddenly and so cruelly. Sheer act of continuing life in the aftermath of such horror was a statement of resilience, determination, and human endurance. Yet the impact of the raids extended far beyond the immediate physical consequences. The psychological scars left on survivors, and on the communities that bore witness, were profound. Children who had escaped capture carried fear and mistrust into adulthood. Parents who lost children experienced grief so profound it could not be fully expressed in words. Families were fragmented, social bonds strained, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability settled over the islands. The realization that even the most remote, isolated communities were not immune to the forces of the wider world challenged the Icelanders' sense of safety, reshaping perceptions of home, security, and the unpredictability of life. This trauma was compounded by the broader understanding of the raid's context. The Barbary pirates were not merely rogue marauders. They were part of a complex system of political and economic networks that spanned the Mediterranean and North African worlds. The raids were driven by profit, by the capture and sale of human beings, and by the geopolitical ambitions of the states that sanctioned or tolerated such activity. For Icelanders, a society accustomed to relative isolation and self-reliance, this knowledge was both alarming and sobering. The world beyond the horizon was vast, interconnected, and often brutal. Iceland's geographic isolation, which had once provided protection from disease, conflict, and political instability, could not shield its people from the reach of human greed and violence. The collective memory of the raids became embedded in Icelandic culture. Stories of courage, loss, and survival were passed down orally, preserved in family narratives, and eventually recorded in written accounts. Songs and poems commemorated the events, honoring both the victims and the survivors. These narratives served multiple purposes. They were warnings to future generations, lessons in vigilance, and a means of processing grief and trauma. Through storytelling, the communities transformed incomprehensible horror into a shared historical consciousness, ensuring that the experiences of those abducted, those left behind, and those who resisted would not be forgotten. One enduring aspect of this cultural memory is the emphasis on resilience, stories of survival, of captives enduring unimaginable conditions abroad, of communities rebuilding homes and lives, of parents refusing to lose hope for children taken far away, served as examples of the human capacity to endure adversity. These narratives reinforced communal identity and values, emphasizing courage, resourcefulness, and determination. Even in the face of overwhelming violence, Icelanders found ways to adapt, to preserve their culture, and to maintain the cohesion of their communities. Religious faith played a significant role in shaping responses to the raids and their legacy. For many, prayer, ritual, and communal worship provided comfort and a sense of agency in an otherwise uncontrollable situation. Churches and religious leaders often organized efforts to ransom captives, coordinate aid, and support grieving families. Faith became intertwined with the narrative of survival and endurance, reinforcing the moral and ethical frameworks through which communities interpreted the raids. The spiritual dimension of Icelandic responses to these events cannot be understated. It offered both solace and a means of framing human suffering within a larger cosmic order, even as the raids themselves had exposed the fragility of life and security. The raids also prompted changes in practical measures for protection. Communities became more vigilant, establishing lookout points, signaling systems, and defensive strategies to guard against potential future attacks. Even the geography that had once made villages vulnerable, the fjords, cliffs, and narrow bays, was leveraged as a defensive advantage where possible. These measures reflected a hard-earned understanding that survival required both resilience in the face of loss and proactive steps to mitigate future risk. Over time, the lessons learned from the raids contributed to a heightened sense of communal responsibility and preparedness. Internationally, the fate of the captives and the Icelandic response became part of broader discussions of diplomacy and maritime law. The efforts to ransom captives, negotiate with foreign powers, and document the events highlighted the interconnectedness of Europe, the Mediterranean, and North Africa. Icelanders, though geographically isolated, were drawn into a network of negotiation, advocacy, and international awareness. The need to secure the release of captives fostered a sense of political engagement, even for a small island nation, and underscored the importance of international connections in protecting vulnerable populations. The human stories of those taken from Iceland were among the most powerful legacies of the raids. Captives endured years, sometimes decades, in foreign lands, often subjected to harsh labor, cultural alienation, and social isolation. Yet many adapted, finding ways to survive, maintain aspects of their identity, and, in some cases, return home. Letters and accounts from ransomed captives provide vivid insight into the physical and psychological challenges they faced, illustrating the depth of human suffering and the resilience required to endure it.